thank you this morning that it's now afternoon, but I'm thinking California time. We thank you, Lord, that you brought us here, that you saved us, that all we need to do to gain entrance into your kingdom is to believe in the one that you sent. The work of God is this, to believe in the one that he sent. And we thank you for that, Lord. And we pray that you'd teach us different things during this conference, that we might run better radio stations for you. We commit ourselves to you. We give everything we are and we have to you, Lord. Show us what you want us to do each day, and may we walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Now, a lot of you probably don't know this, but back in 1927, there was a ship that sailed out of New York Harbor from Mexico, and it was a desperately needed shipment of mayonnaise. And as it was sailing through the Caribbean, a storm came up, and the ship sunk. And it happened to be on the 5th of May, which is why they call today Cinco de Mayo. So, what do you mean that's the worst? You're laughing. Not going to be the worst if you're laughing. You know, I thought I'd talk, but just begin for a couple minutes just with my testimony. And I thank God for all the things he let me do and the places he let me serve and the things he put in my life. I'm a big fan of radio. When I was a little kid, my dad told me when I grew up we were going to get a ham radio and we could talk to people around the world. And I imagined something the size of a room or something. But my dad kind of lost interest in that, but I didn't. And ham radio was a hobby that I got into when I was in high school. I got my ham radio license. I built a transmitter when I was in high school, and I talked to people around the world. My goal always was to work in broadcasting. And so I went to school for engineering. I worked in AM and FM radio. I worked for NBC and CBS at different times. I was a board operator in an AM FM station. I ran the master control room at Channel 10 in Philadelphia, which is the CBS owned and operated affiliate there. Television is the maximum fun, without fail. But for a Christian, it's just very expensive to get in. Plus, you can't watch TV while you're driving. You can now, but it's pretty hazardous to your health. So I got saved in 1981, and I got into radio in a big way. I worked for Boeing, designing cockpit radio systems for their Chinook helicopters. Anytime you see on the news a helicopter, tandem rotor, two big rotors going this way, that's a Boeing Chinook. They're only made one place. That's just outside of Philadelphia. No other place in the world do they make that kind of helicopter. So if you see that, you can say that's a product of Pennsylvania. I got married. I got into computers because that was the thing to get into. I still dabbled with ham radio, and I heard Chuck Smith in 1995 say, all of you should get radio stations. This was at the East Coast Pastors Conference at Sandy Cove. And I thought, I'll probably never preach like Chuck Smith does, but, I bet you I can build a better radio station than he can, because I know how to do that. That's my hobby. And we were trying to figure out how to do that. In 1997, I called CSN, the Calvary Satellite Network, and they said, what you do is you send us $500, we'll put you on a list, and then if we can get something in your area, you'll get it. And I said, no, you don't understand how this works. I want the license in the name of my church. And they said, well, then you need to call Bob Moore, because he's the smartest man there is. And I first called him in 1997, and I said, I would like to get a radio station. And he said to me, within the first few minutes, if you want to get involved in radio, then you need to learn patience. And if you're not willing to learn patience, then don't get involved in radio. And I never would recommend that anybody prays for patience. I think that's way too dangerous. But I talked to him in 97. We applied for our first license in 1999. We never did get that one. We applied in 2000 for another one, and we finally were granted that in 2005, which is when we got on the air. So it was 8 years from when I talked to Bob till when we got on the air, more like 8.5 years. And the FCC's wheels turn excruciatingly slow. We applied in 2000. We got on the air in 2005. Our 1999 application languished until about 2007, almost 10 years, and then they gave it to somebody else, and we never got that one. It doesn't really matter because we didn't need that one. We got something better in 2005. And since then, we've got a lot more. When I started, I just wanted to have a little station that I could hear from the church to my house a mile away. And, the Lord had, bigger ideas. And I was just going to plug into CSN. And when the bridge got started, Chris McCarrick told me, no, you don't understand how it works. You carry other people and they pay you. And then you can use that money to pay your bills. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try that then. And that's what we've done ever since. In 2002, before we even went on the air at Hope FM, our attorney, Harry Martin, told us that next year, in 2003, you're going to be able to apply for translators. And, you should be thinking now so you know what you want to do when that window opens. And so we applied for 68 translators in 2003. Bob Moore was helping me. He was helping 53 other people. And he finally said to me, you're going to have to figure this out on your own. I think you can do it, and these other people need more help than you. So we kind of got carried away and applied for translators everywhere. He kept saying, you got to get out to Harrisburg. You got to get down to Baltimore. You got to do it. You got to do it. And we did it. And it took years, but now we have signals in all of those places. So this year is a year like 2002 and 2003, where I still remember where I was at one of my computer clients when I talked to Harry Martin on the phone that day in 2002, telling me about this filing window. And that's what we're telling you about now, that the FCC has announced an opportunity to apply for translators coming up most likely later this year. Now, the last time they had a window to apply for translators, an open window for anybody to apply for translators, I think was in 2003. I don't think there's been a window since then. The FCC, the wheels turn very, very slow. And in 2003, when we applied for 68, there were some enterprising guys that applied for over 4,000 using computer software to fill out the applications as fast as they could online. And that got a lot of people mad. They called it the Great Translator Invasion. They were mad at these people for being red-blooded Americans who just figured out a way to do something that they had not anticipated. And so they made it harder now to do it, and it's very rare. And you're limited, as Kathleen said earlier, to 10 applications. That's all you can file. That's because in 2003, people were applying for hundreds or thousands, and they don't want that to happen again. My opinion is it would be better if they let everybody apply for one translator, because then there'd be very little overlap. Almost all of them would get granted, and then next year we could do it again. But they haven't figured that out yet, but they're limiting it to 10, which will limit the competition. Now, this is also the first time since the last millennium when you could apply for a license in the non-commercial band, which is the frequencies below 92 megahertz. If you have an LPFM here, you could be on any frequency. But if you have a full power here, most of us are below FM 92 because those are the frequencies that are set aside. It's called the reserved band, and it's reserved for non-commercial groups. They make it easier to get licenses, but you have to comply with other rules. And the process, instead of bidding with money, they use comparative criteria to pick the winner. Well, they've never, ever had an opportunity where you could apply for non-commercial translators in this century. It was in the 90s that you could do it. Maybe the first 2 months of the year 2000. But ever since then, there's never been an opportunity. So my suggestion here for a talk was why you should apply. Oh, can you put the slides up? Oh, there you go. Why you should apply for an FM translator in the upcoming window. Now, the lawyers talked some about the legal stuff. When I'm done, Bob Moore is going to talk more about the technical stuff. This is intended not to be a technical presentation. This is intended to be a why presentation. And I want to give a shout out to Elon because X helped me put together the outline here of what I'm going to talk about. So the bullet points mostly came from X, but my commentary comes from me. So these are the topics we're going to look at today. What is a translator? We're going to look at the reserved non-commercial band. We're going to look at why this window matters. We're going to look at key details of the window, eligibility, application limits, rules and restrictions, the current status, and how you can be preparing now, and also key takeaways, and we'll have Q&A if we get to it about 4 o'clock. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what is a translator? It's a low-power secondary station that rebroadcasts a primary signal. So what that means by secondary station is a translator cannot originate programming. It's secondary to the main station. The main station has the programming. The translator repeats or rebroadcasts that programming in a different area or perhaps in the same area. It's called a translator because it translates your signal to a different frequency, not a different language. It doesn't convert from English to French or English to Spanish, but it converts from 90.5 to some other frequency, and they call that translating. It extends your coverage area to new areas, but you cannot originate different programming in those areas. You can use it to fill in gaps in your coverage due to geography. It's on a different frequency than your main station, and there's 2 kinds of translators that you're going to learn about today, a fill-in and a non-fill-in translator. And so this here is a picture, it's an example of non-fill-in translators. Now, that big oblong shape down in the center there, that's our main station, Hope FM 90.5 in Medford Lakes, New Jersey. That's the Jersey coast along the right. The Delaware River in the middle, that's Delaware, kind of, this thing has a pointer in it, I think, if I know how to use it. Maybe it's here. Oh, look at that. And you can't see it on the white. Okay. So if you could just imagine it in your mind. The shape all the way to the left there, that looks kind of like the letter D, that's our translator in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, near Chris Swanson's church. Then moving to the right, a smaller oblong shape is along the Delaware River. That's a translator that we have in Philadelphia. Then to the right of that is a translator we have in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. All the way down at the bottom right is our translator in Tuckerton, New Jersey. And then the big shape is our own station, 90.5. So those translators rebroadcast the signal from Hope FM in other places. Those are called non-fill-in translators because they're not filling in inside of our area. They're extending the coverage area. And you're going to want to know these terms because we're going to come back to them later on. Well, the Chester Springs one is probably 75 miles from our main transmitter, maybe 75 or thereabouts. But in this coming window, you'll be able to go further than that. Now, this is an example of fill-in translators. A fill-in translator, can you see? It's inside the coverage area of the main station. So that big station there, that's WSOX 96.1 in York, Pennsylvania. And Hope FM is carried on one of their HD channels. And inside that, you see several smaller shapes. The one to the right is Lancaster. The one to the left is Harrisburg. In the center is Hershey. And at the bottom is York, Pennsylvania. We're moving some of these around. So a fill-in translator fills in within your coverage area. A non-fill-in translator goes outside of your coverage. Everybody got that? Now, why would you want to fill in inside your main coverage area? Historically, the main reason was because of geography. Let's say there was a mountain, and people on the other side of the mountain were in your coverage area, but they couldn't hear you because the mountain blocked the signal. You could put a fill-in translator there, historically. Then some enterprising person, I don't know who, maybe 20 years ago, went to the FCC and said, hey, can we use a fill-in translator to rebroadcast an HD channel? And the FCC said yes, and that was a big boon for us, and I think Lloyd is doing the same thing in New York. It was a big opportunity for us, so we negotiated a deal with WSOX, which is a super big, full-power rock and roll station, we're carried on their HD2 channel, and the FCC considers this a fill-in because we're inside their contour. But because we're in HD and almost nobody has an HD radio, the only way people can hear us is by listening to our translators, which are standard FM translators, not HD, but they legally let us do it inside of our coverage area. So in order to do this, you need to rent, buy, own, or somehow get yourself an HD channel. And we've been able to successfully do this exact same thing in Baltimore, in central Pennsylvania here, Harrisburg area, and down at the Jersey Shore in Atlantic City. And in all three places, we're able to have multiple translators with higher power than we could ever have any other way because of these rules. So we've kind of maximized what we can do with translators. Now, this coming window is for the non-commercial reserve band. Again, we said that's reserved for non-commercial stations. And these are the frequencies at the bottom of the FM dial, from 88.1 to 91.9. 20 channels out of 100 are reserved for non-commercial groups. And that's where you'll always hear, or usually hear, Christian stations, public radio, colleges and universities, and anybody else who's non-commercial. There are a few exceptions to that, but in general, the bottom of the FM band is where you'll hear those stations. Those channels are reserved exclusively for non-commercial use. Now, a non-commercial group can use another frequency, like in Philadelphia, K-Love. I'm not supposed to say that word, but in Philadelphia, K-Love is on 106.9. They are non-commercial, but they're using a commercial frequency. A non-commercial group can use a commercial frequency and do so in a non-commercial manner if they want to, but the opposite is not true. A commercial group may not use a reserve channel. Now, Chuck Smith with K-Wave out in California, he was on 107.9. That was a commercial frequency, and they were a commercial station. So they ran commercials. K-Love does not do it. These translators are available to non-commercial stations, which could be us, non-commercial, full power, or low power. Low power FM stations are always non-commercial. If you're full power here and you're non-commercial, they're available to you, and there also are non-commercial AM stations, believe it or not. And so these translators in this upcoming window are available to all of those people. The window is limited to new translators only, and only for existing stations, and only in this frequency band. And as I said earlier, there's not been an opportunity to apply in this band of frequencies for a long time. There's probably a good number of frequencies available that we can use. So why this window matters? This will be the third time I'm saying it, but this is the first time in many years that we've been allowed to file for translators on these frequencies. In fact, since they started with filing windows, which was in the year 2000, they never had a window for this before. Up till 2000, you could send in an application any day, any week, any time for anything you wanted. The beginning in the year 2000, they said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have only a 1 week period of time. We're going to call it a window, and you'll be allowed to apply during a 1 week period for whatever we tell you you're allowed to apply for. And they don't have very many of these, so it could be years or decades before they do it again. This helps to grow your coverage area. And if you have a low power station, you're allowed to own 2 translators. They have to be within 10 or 20 miles of your station, depending on your market size. And you can never expand further than that. But if you have a full power station, you can apply for a translator anywhere in the country. For example, Lloyd, if you have a friend in California, you could apply for a translator in California. You could feed that from New Jersey to California. Tom was telling me about a friend in Florida who I think is here somewhere. I think I met him. And he'd like to get a translator down there. Well, you can do that. You can, with this filing window, apply for a translator anywhere in the country if you have a full power station. Anywhere. And that's because on the non-commercial band, you're allowed to feed the signal to the translator by alternate means. It does not have to be over-the-air reception. Traditionally, historically, translators always had to be able to receive the signal off the air. So at Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, I showed you that slide earlier, we have an antenna 300 feet in the air pointing back to New Jersey, and it picks up our signal from New Jersey, and we rebroadcast that in that area. It's all done over the air. But with this window and these frequencies, you may file them or feed them through the internet or any other way you want to. This is because a number of years ago, non-commercial stations went to the FCC and cried and said, we're poor, we're non-commercial, help us out. And the FCC said, well, we'll let you feed these through the internet, but only if they're on the non-commercial frequency. So you have to be a non-commercial group, and the translator has to be on the non-commercial frequency. This is a case where everything is lining up perfectly for us to be able to do this. And I think this is a terrific opportunity to expand. If you know or you're friendly with a pastor in some other town, maybe the church you came from, or maybe the church you sent people to, or maybe you just know somebody there, this is your opportunity to put a translator there and feed your signal to them from your station, wherever it is. I mentioned earlier, LP/FM stations are limited by mileage, and this is not an auction. So you'll apply, and when the window is closed, you'll be able to see a list of who applied. And if you applied to put a translator on 88.1 in Podunk, South Dakota, and 3 other people applied to put a translator on the same frequency in that same town, then the FCC is going to implement their processing procedures to pick a winner for who's going to get that. But if you're the only person that applied there, you're going to win immediately. And when the FCC processes this, they're going to call those singletons. So if you put in for a translator here, there's a good chance you could be a singleton. There was not a good chance in 2003 because some guys applied for 4,000 translators, so they pretty much applied on every channel, on every tower in America. But now that they're limiting you to 10, there's going to be less competition. You can bet that K-Love is going to want to do this, but K-Love's only going to be able to apply for 10, the same number you can apply for. So they can't apply in every town in every city. This is a little bit of details about the 2026 window. It's the first ever window, I already said that. Since this whole thing began, this is the first time you ever could apply for translators during a filing window on these frequencies. And that's where the applications have to be, between 88.1 and 91.9. You cannot modify translators that already exist on those frequencies. The dates are not known yet. There are some procedures that are not known yet. You know, I tell people all the time, if you think you waited a long time for your tax refund from the IRS, you never dealt with the FCC. Because people complain they wait a few weeks for their tax refund, but the FCC, you could wait a few years. And as somebody said earlier, they never make mistakes, and they do things on their own time, and if they ever made a mistake, they'll find a way to tell you it was your mistake. Who can apply for these translators? You must be the licensee or permittee of an existing non-commercial full power station or a low power FM station. You may not apply for it if you don't have your station already running. If you have a permit for a station, it's not on the air, you can't apply for it. We were not on the air in 2003 when we applied for 68 licenses. They didn't have this rule back then, but now you have to be on the air. The proposed translator has to rebroadcast your station, and generally new entities cannot apply. So existing stations can apply. You have to be the co-owner of your station and that translator. Kathleen said this morning, they are married for life. So that translator, you own it, you run it. Now, you can get support from people. If you have a friend in Louisiana that would like to have a translator at her church, which is not a Calvary chapel, you could put one there, and they could support it. And you could tell them, hey, if you support it, we'll put you on the radio. But you have to own it. You have to ultimately have control of it. The limits, we said earlier, it's 10 applications per entity. Kathleen said earlier she was going to check on whether it was per station or per entity. We'll find out from Kathleen for sure, and when she does, we'll put that out on the list server. But I'm virtually positive it's by entity, not by station, because if it was by station, K-Love would be able to apply for thousands of them because they have hundreds of full power stations. So I'm almost certain you're going to find out that it's by entity. 10 for a full power station. LPFMs, tribal LPFMs are up to 4. That doesn't apply to anybody here that I know of. Other LPFMs, which is all of us here that have LPMs, 2 applications. And attributable interests count towards the cap. So that means that if you're on the board of 2 organizations that own full power radio stations, then the cap of 10 applies as a total between those 2 applications, between those 2 entities. So they look at who's on the board. So if you have a board member at your church who's also on the board of another church, and you have a radio station, and the other church has a radio station, then the limit of 10 is combined on the total of those 2 churches. So you have to be careful who's on your board. My good friend Mike Smith used to be on our board, but he got off because he has a separate organization. And in 2007, he wanted to apply for 10 full power stations, and we wanted to apply for 10. So he got off of our board so that we could each apply for 10. If he had stayed on the board, the limit would have applied to both of us. Excess applications will be dismissed. So if you apply for 15, they're going to dismiss the last 5, not the first 5, not the 5 that you pick. If you apply for 15, they're going to keep the first 10 and dismiss anything after that. If you have someone on your board who's on the board of another place and you don't realize it, and you apply for 10 and they apply for 10, they're going to say, well, this board member is on both boards, so you can only have 10 in total, and they're going to dismiss anything. They're going to keep the first 10 and dismiss after that. And the first 10 might not be the ones you want them to keep. So the answer here is be careful. Here are some rules and restrictions. Again, the translators can only operate in the reserve band, which is the first 20 channels. You have to protect other services. So just because you turn on your car radio and you don't hear anything there doesn't mean you can use that frequency. And I think you all know that because you all went through this when you got your first radio station. Probably every one of us put the car radio on and said, oh, I don't hear anything there. That'd be a great frequency to use. But maybe you couldn't use it because there was somebody 1 channel away or 2 channels away that was too close to you. You have to look at what other stations are on your channel and on the 3 channels above and on the 3 channels below. It's very complicated. That's why Bob Moore gets involved, because he handles the hard stuff. So you have to protect other stations who were there first. You have to have site assurance, which means if you're going to use a certain tower, you need to have permission from the owner of that tower that you may use their tower. You don't need to prove to the FCC that you have permission, but you better have it because they might come back and ask you for it. And one of the things that happens in competitive situations where one of us applies for a translator and someone else applies in the same city on the same frequency, the first thing everybody does is they look at who are we competing against and what can we find out about the other group to get them kicked out. So if there's 3 people competing for the same frequency, me and 2 others, then I want to look at how can I get these other people kicked out? And I helped Frank Ippolito in South Jersey get his LPFM station, and when he applied, someone else applied. And I said, Frank, we're going to win this, and here's how we're going to do it. They made 2 mistakes on their application. So we're going to point out to the FCC one of their 2 mistakes. And the FCC is going to kick out their application. And then they're going to come back and they're going to fix that mistake. They're going to try to resubmit their application. And you can only resubmit 1 time. So we're going to point out one problem. They're going to fix it and resubmit. And we're going to pray that they don't discover the other problem. And that's exactly what happened. They got their application resubmitted. We came along and said, oh, there's another problem there. And they got kicked out, and Frank Ippolito won it. When Ben got his station in Montrose, he was competing against another group, And they claimed the same preference Ben did, 3 points for being a local established group. Well, we looked at the Department of State website in Colorado, and we saw that that other group had incorporated themselves 2 days after they filed their application with the FCC. So they not only were not local, they weren't established, they didn't even exist on the day that they filed their application. So we called Harry Martin, and we said, these people filed an application, they didn't even exist on the day they filed it. And Harry said, well, I don't think the FCC would care about that. Well, we said, well, they're not established because they haven't been in existence for 3 years. And he said, well, they will care about that. So we went to the FCC and we said, dear FCC, this other group was not entitled. They could apply, but they're not entitled to 3 points for being an established group because they weren't established. You have to be in existence for 2 years or more to be an established group. And the other group wrote back and said, oh, no, we're established. We've lived here all of our lives. This is our town. We love this place. And we wrote back and said, it's great that you lived there your whole life, but your group was not in existence, so your group was not established. And then the FCC came back and said, you know what? None of that matters because you guys, on the day you applied, didn't even exist. So you're out of here. And Ben got the license. So when you... This is like playing chess. And by the way, I have no idea how to play chess. No idea. But I know how to do this. This is a game to me, and I like to play it, and I like to win, and I know how the game works. You know, there was that brilliant economist, Thomas Sowell, who said that each person in the world is an island of knowledge in a sea of ignorance. And I just love that. And he said, some people, their island is bigger than others, but nobody's island is as big as the sea. And we all know a little bit about something. Some of us know a lot about something. People say to me, oh man, you know a lot about this. Why? There's an infinite number of things I know nothing about. I think with relation to God, you see, God is infinite. We are finite. You could take what he said. He never claimed to be a Christian, but you could twist that around and say, we all know a little bit about the Lord, right? But none of us knows everything, and none of us ever will. Maybe some of us know a little more or a little less. This is a game, and I learned from Bob Moore and another friend to play the game well and to play it to win. And in some circles, Calvary Chapel has a bad reputation from people who are mad that they didn't win just because we know how to follow the rules. There's a lot of people doing this. They don't hire an engineer. They don't hire a lawyer. They just get on the FCC's website and they figure it's like placing an order on Amazon. We're just going to fill it out and submit it, but they make a lot of mistakes when they do that. So if you're going to do it, pay the money to get the right kind of help so that you can do it right, so that you can do it to win. Because if you're competing with another group, they're going to compare your applications using a lot of different criteria that are objective. They used to use subjective criteria, and eventually the courts struck down every one of their criteria. They would pick a winner, and the loser would sue and say, you should not have picked them. So they had to restructure all their criteria to be objective. One of the criteria, for example, is how many people can hear your signal versus your competitor. If you're 10% bigger than your competitor, you get a point for that. If you're 25% bigger than your competitor, you get 2 points for that. If you cover more square miles than your competitor, you can get points for that. So they're going to compare your application to others, and you need to make your application correct. You need to dot your I's, cross your T's, and you need to maximize it in every possible way. It needs to be done professionally, or you don't have as much chance of winning. So where did I leave off on this slide here? Oh, reasonable site assurance. So that's another thing. If you put down, you're going to put your translator on this tower over here, and you have a competitor, your competitor is going to call whoever owns that tower and say, hey, did you give Ben Garati permission to use your tower for this application? And if he says, no, I never heard of anybody named Ben Garati, then your competitor is going to tell the FCC he doesn't have site assurance. And you better have an email or something. You don't need a notarized document, but just an email. It doesn't need to be a lease. You don't have to agree on the price. You just have to have something on file that says, yes, if we're willing to negotiate a lease with you if you're successful at getting this translator. And believe it or not, a lot of people lose because they didn't do that simple thing. Applications are processed using the standard window procedures. Mutually exclusive applications use the point system. So the first thing they're going to do, they're going to look at every application that was filed, and they're going to look for any application where there's no competitors, where there's one application in that city and no one else is competing for it. And those people are going to get their permits right away. And then, if there's 2 or 3 or more applications competing, then they have to pick a winner. And they have a whole procedure they go through: coverage area, number of people that can hear it, how long if you're an established organization. And they have tiebreakers. If you're exactly tied, they go to a second round. And Bob Moore knows how to do all this. So as soon as the applications come out, he's going to tell you right away, you're in first place or second place. You're going to win or you're going to lose. And if you're going to lose, well, then we're going to figure out what we can do to change it and make you win. So if we're going to lose, we're going to call the other guy's tower and make sure he got site assurance because we want to win. So the name of the game here is to win. The name of the game is to put out God's word, by the way. That's why we do this. We do it to put out God's word. February 2026 is when the FCC started this whole process by asking for comments. The way they do any rulemaking at the FCC is they put out a document. They say, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And you can give them your comments. And then when they factor in all the comments, they come out with what the final rules are. There's a deadline to file your comments by, and then there's another deadline where you can file comments on other people's comments. And then once all the deadlines are done, then the FCC takes a lunch break, they take vacation, they take the month of June off or something. But eventually they come out and they come out with their finalized rules. And the window, tentatively late 2026, take that with a grain of salt. Don't bet any money on that. It'll be when they get around to it. Maybe it'll be late in 2026. And then when that's over again, then they're going to pick the winners. It's possible this window could happen in the fall, and by next spring, some people could have permits to build stations. If you're in a competitive situation, then it could take years for them to resolve that. By the way, sometimes you can also resolve your own permit, your own competitive situation. If you're here and I'm here and we're just touching in the middle, you can call the other person up and say, hey, if you turn your antenna 5 degrees this way and I turn my antenna 8 degrees this way, we won't be touching anymore. That's called a technical settlement. So Bob Moore is good at figuring that out. You can figure out what you need to do. But if the both of you are on top of each other, then there's no way to resolve that. The FCC allows you to do things at certain times. You're not allowed to call the other people and talk to them until the FCC fires the starting pistol. And then they'll give you a time when you can negotiate with people. Sometimes you can buy them off. Somebody changed their mind. When Ron Dozler was trying to get his station, he was competing with the Chamber of Commerce. But by the time they got around to looking at the application, whoever at the Chamber of Commerce had applied for the application no longer worked for the Chamber of Commerce. And Bob went there and asked them, and they said, we don't even know anything about a radio license. And he said, well, would you mind signing this letter right here, withdrawing your application? And so if the other person will withdraw, then you can get it. They can't make a profit off you. You can't pay them a lot of money to withdraw, but you can cover their cost. Things change over the years. I remember on Long Island when Doug Kinney was building his station, he was competing with another group. And the FCC said, you're exactly equal. You're going to have to share time. You can each have 12 hours a day, which I think is a terrible solution, but that's what they do. And the other group asked Doug Kinney, they said, hey, since we're going to share, why don't we chip in and we'll build a tower and an antenna, and you can use it 12 hours a day, and we'll use it 12 hours a day, and we'll keep the cost low. And Doug Kinney called me up and said, what should I do? I said, under no circumstances do you want to do that. What you want to do is build your own tower, get on the air, and pray that those other people lose interest or can't come up with the money and get it done by the deadline. And that's exactly what happened. He built his license. The other people couldn't get their act together in time. The time ran out. They lost out. Doug Kinney was able to go to the FCC and say, those other people never built their station. He was able to get 24 hours a day on that station. And another Calvary did that up near Rochester or the Finger Lakes or somewhere else. They did exactly the same thing. Don't agree to any proposal from anybody unless you talk to Bob Moore or me or your attorney or somebody who knows something about it. But there are some things you can do right now. How to prepare now? Number one, identify where you might want to put a translator. Do you have any gaps in your coverage? If you're an LPFM, you can only go 10 or 20 miles. A lawyer is going to be able to tell you later what the exact number is. Is there a town, 1 or 2 towns away, where you'd like to have a signal? You could put a translator here and one here and expand your coverage area within a relatively small area. But for an LPFM, you could maybe double or triple your coverage area that way. You want to identify that now. If you're a full power station, then your sites can be on the whole country. So do you know somebody somewhere that you're friends with, the church you came from, that you sent people to, that you're friendly with, or that you just want to take for a lot of money? Doesn't matter. But where can you put one and help somebody else out? I like to help other churches out. We have mostly, well, maybe not mostly, but probably at least half of our programs are local Calvary chapels. And if I can find a Calvary chapel somewhere where there's not a station there and put one there, then I know that guy's going to want to come on the air because it's in our DNA as Calvary Chapel. That if you ask a Calvary Chapel, pastor, do you want to be on the radio? Of course, they say, where do I sign? How quick can we start tomorrow? But if you ask a lot of other churches, forget it. When we were trying to find more people for our air many years ago, Jerry Paradise at Calvary Philly gave me a list of all the churches that participated in the Harvest Crusade. And he went through the list and he checked off the churches that he thought were pretty solid. And we sent them all something in the mail. Would you like to come on Hope FM? 0 response. Maybe 1 call or something, but nothing came out of it. But if you ask 100 Calvary Chapel guys, 80 of them will want to come on the radio. So identify spots. This is a terrific opportunity because for all the Calvary Chapels that there are in the United States, many of them, I'm sure the vast majority of them do not have radio stations. So if you know someone and in their town they'd like to have a radio station, maybe they're willing to help you pay for it, and maybe you can find a way to put them on the air, then you could expand into that town. And it could be anywhere. If it's on the other side of the country, you may have to hire a contract engineer to go out there and take care of it for you. But who cares? It gets the gospel out more. Remember, full power stations can apply anywhere in the country. Consult a broadcast engineer for frequency availability. Well, that would be Bob Moore in our case. I have limited capability to do that. Bob wrote his own software because if he sees a problem, he writes a program to solve his problem. Most of us, my other good friend, Charlie Lockery, I tried to get him to come. He runs a big network of Christian stations in this area, actually, music stations. And he's a guy that does it on the back of a napkin. And that's because he's been doing it since before computers. And he would spread out the maps on the kitchen table. And I asked Bob Moore years ago, where should I put my Hope FM transmitter? And he ran all his equations through his computer, and he gave me the latitude and longitude where I should put my tower. And I asked my friend Charlie Lockery, where do you think I should put my tower? And he looked at a map and he said, well, you got Harry over here on 90.3, and George is over here on 90.1, and whoever's down here, and you should put it right here. He was only 1 kilometer away from where Bob Moore told me to put it. 1 kilometer. It was amazing. But you need to have a broadcast engineer do it. And Bob Moore only going to send you a bill when he files your application. And it's not for a lot of money. So make use of his services. You need to work with your attorney on all kinds of things that need to be right. Ownership things, however you say it, attributable things, strategy, what have you. Most of you probably already have in your bylaws whatever you need to have there in order to own a radio station. But you want to check in with Kathleen or this new fellow who's going to be taking over for her to make sure that all of your legal mumbo jumbo is correct, because that's the stuff people get tripped up on. If you are competing with somebody else, they're going to come after you looking at anything that they can find wrong with your application. And by the way, we're going to do the same thing to them. That's part of the fun of the game. We love when that list comes out, right, Bob? We love it because okay, how are we going to beat the other people here? When I first put my station on the air, there was a little station in New Jersey on 90.5. He had a permit to build a station in the center of Jersey, and then he never could get it built. And he made it smaller and put it over here. And then he made it smaller still, and it wound up being in Ocean City, New Jersey on 90.5. And by making it smaller, he created this big vacuum where I applied. And when I came on the air, he called me up, Bill, you got to help me. I have listeners that can't hear my station anymore. Some other station came on the air, and now they can't hear me. And I said, well, I hate to tell you, but it was my station that's preventing them from hearing your station. Well, how could you do that? How could you do that? Well, it's like this. Suppose you own a house, and across the street from you is a beautiful view of a lake. And you raised your kids there, and you had picnics there, and you had your friends over, and you enjoyed this beautiful view of the lake. But then, someday, someone came along and bought that lot across the street from you and put up a big house, and now you can't see the lake anymore. And what's the moral of the story there? You should have bought the lot when you could have bought it. If someone else bought it and building it, it's not their fault. And that's what we did, and we do this all the time. When Mike went on the air in Georgia, his signal clipped into an NPR station, and they were having nuclear meltdowns that some Christian station was stealing their listeners. And they complained to the FCC and everything. And Mike called me, and we looked at it, and I'm sure Bob was involved, and guess what? Sorry. You know, they should have done that themselves. They didn't. Now Truth FM is there. Truth FM is reaching into Clemson, South Carolina, from the top of a mountain on Georgia that I would never drive on that road myself, but Mike does. So you want to check all this out. You want to be sure you have the budget. You're required when you apply to the FCC to have a budget for what you're proposing. You just can't say, well, I'm hoping to raise the money. You have to have the money or have commitments to have the money. A lot of people ignore that, but you could get tripped up on that. It doesn't cost a lot of money to build a translator, so you really don't need that much. You need to have a budget to cover the legal and other costs. You can monitor the FCC website, our list server. Is everybody on the list server? So if you're not on the list server, you should talk to me, because if we hear news, we send it out there. Benefits and challenges. The benefit is you reach more people. It doesn't cost that much. You can improve your service if you have terrain issues. Challenges, there's a cap on how many you can build. Look, 10's a lot. I would never want to build more than 10. I'd drive myself crazy. That's a lot of work. I don't have the manpower to do that. 10 is probably enough for us. If you're a translator, if you're an LPFM, 2 might be enough. Challenges are you could have other people competing with you. We call that mutually exclusive. If you apply and I apply in the same town, both of our licenses cannot be granted. That's called mutually exclusive. And then there's a whole process for untangling that. You could have engineering issues, siting issues. You got to find a tower to put it on. Cost consideration, deadlines. When you get the permit, you have to build it in 3 years or you lose it. Key takeaways. It's a rare historic opportunity for us. When they say rare, like I said, it hasn't happened in more than 20 years. You could also call that historic. Chances are, I'm looking down the room here, at the average age here, we might all be dead by the time this happens again. Very likely, because the FCC goes very, very slow. It's limited to only non-commercial groups. There are caps. We don't know the exact dates yet. We'll put them out on the list server. But the key is you can start preparing now. I started preparing months ago. And Bob Moore has been looking at different sites for me. I know Mike is looking at sites. This would be a great time to be thinking, where might I want to do this? If you're an LPFM, maybe a few towns away. If you're a full power, maybe you know somebody somewhere where you might want to put it. Now's the time to talk to Bob Moore and say, you know, I'd like to build a translator in Omaha, Nebraska. Are there any frequencies available there? Because you work now. If you wait till the 1 week filing window, you won't get it all done in that amount of time. You need to plan ahead. Start preparing now. So there's my email address, bill@lcceng.com. Also, ccmarlton.org works. The fcc.gov website has lots of information. You can go to the FCC website, sign up for their daily digest, and they send you an email every day with everything they did that day. I scan that email every day. Most of it is irrelevant, but if I see something relating to FM radio, then I read that. That's a good thing to be doing. If it's of interest to this group, I put it out on the CCRM. Rec Networks is another group that's more of a liberal-minded group, but they pretty much help everybody. They'll help a Christian station or an atheist station. They don't really care. Their engineering is very good. They know what they're doing. Their website has a lot of good information on it. Future Media Bureau public notices. Well, again, if you subscribe to the FCC's Daily Digest, you'll be able to hear more about that. So that's what I have to say. I hope it was interesting and informative. We have a few minutes left. We have an hour break, so if we go a few minutes over, we could do that too. If there's questions, we'll be happy to. None from Colorado, though. We don't take.
Right. Give me a C. Oh, no. Hey, Bill, so I take it that a lot will apply for the 10, and if they don't make it because financially they didn't plan, and so they give themselves an out or they bow out, are those, I guess what I'm asking is, there going to be like a fallout, and then we can take advantage of a fallout if not everybody applies? Or?
Well, the problem is, let's say somebody applies that doesn't really have the money.
Right.
Well, they didn't volunteer. In fact, you have to check a box that you do have the money. So if they check the box that they have the money and they don't have the money, the FCC is probably never going to find out. And they might win. And even though they have no money, they might win, and then you lost. And then if they don't have the money actually to build it, then the whole thing can time out. You remember that group that did that to you, where they applied for something that couldn't even be built. It was impossible, defied the laws of physics and gravity. But they applied for it anyway. They won, and you lost, but they could never build what they got. But then it didn't matter because there was no way to go back to you. Unfortunately, the rules don't provide any way to go back. But if there is a period of competition, you can offer to buy them out. It'd be pretty hard to say they don't have the money, because I don't think there's any rule that gives the FCC the right to ask for their bank statements to see if they have them. Lloyd.
So they're going to do the same thing they did last time, where if you're competing with one other person, and maybe you're competing on 3 different things, and you can negotiate, okay, you can have that one, we'll take these 2, or vice versa. Are they going to do that? And also, if you get, let's say you get 10, and you really can't use all 10, you don't have the money for all 10, can you sell the ones, or no, you can't sell what you've won? How would that work?
Well, in the first thing you said, are you going to be competing with other people? And the answer is yes. And you might be competing with no one, or you might be competing with 1 or 2 or 10. You just don't know. And there will be an opportunity. Part of the process is giving an opportunity for negotiations and for settlements. So there'll be a time when you can go back and forth, talk to groups, figure out who you can buy off, pay off, get to move out of the way, or how you can mutually work things out. There is always an opportunity to do that. And remind me your second question.
If you get all of them, you can't use them all. Can you tell them?
Well, you can't, because in this window, normally you could, but in this window, what you apply for is permanently married to the full power station rebroadcasting it. So if you say, I'm going to rebroadcast WRDR on this translator, then nobody else could buy it because it could only be used to broadcast WRDR. Any other of the previous windows, you would have been able to do that, but not in this window. Ben?
Moving forward, if we apply for 5, get all 5, but we can't get a tower company to build the tower, do we have resources among us, or could we put out the word? Does anybody have these welding teams that could put up towers for us? We could import them from, say, Georgia to Colorado, New Jersey.
Well, there's a group out of Merritt Island that will travel around the world and build towers. Okay, but I have to say, this is just my opinion. Nowadays, it's very difficult to build a tower. 50 years ago, no problem. Today, the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. Nobody wants a tower. And if you want to build a new tower today, the FCC requires you to contact every Indian tribe in America to ask them if the land you're on was ever owned by their Indian tribe. And if they don't get back to you, you still have to wait 90 days, then you have to contact them again. And then you also have to do an archaeological dig to see if there's anything of significance below where you're building a tower. Is just very complicated. Now, maybe you can put a telephone pole on your church property or put it on your roof. But my policy has always been, I rent. I rent from tower companies. And I think it's just worth it not to have the hassle. There's three things that matter in radio: height, and height. And so I look around for the tallest, highest, biggest tower I can find. And the second thing is I try to find a tower that's owned by a smaller company that's easier to deal with. If I can find a tower owned by a local station or by a small tower company. We have excellent relations in this area with a company that owns 30 or 40 towers in central Pennsylvania. They're terrific to work for. Vertical Bridge is another company that I really like. I'm doing a second job with them right now in Harrisburg. Some companies are easier to work with than other companies, but I recommend you rent tower space on the highest, meanest, baddest tower you can find that'll cover your area. Bob, you had your hand raised. He's going to give you the microphone.
Sorry. And hopefully this will work out. Can people hear me? Okay. We had a window some years back where we had 25 applicants filed for the same, that were overlapped from the DC area all the way up to Boston. And the reason was somebody in Rhode Island filed it with 100,000 watts when they're not even allowed to have 100,000 watts in this part of the country. Okay? And the FCC locked it all up, and I had to sort through it and talk to each of the people, and you could do that, and we ended up getting a couple stations out of it, and so did a couple other people, and the people that were going to lose, I gave them a clear indication of why they would lose, and that worked. Now, another thing you could do is you can file, build, but build small, and then build later when you can afford more tower rent. You know, putting up a telephone pole is cheap. Putting it on a silo in a rural area on a hill there's no database that tells you there's a silo there, but you could put it on there and it works fine. And there's even power on the silo. So there are ways to do this where you don't have to talk to, and I'll use the name, it's a local company, American Tower, owns a huge number of towers across the country, and they're just escalating their prices so rapidly that nobody can afford the space. Sells, now that we've got 5G, we've got multiple antennas for each tower and for multiple 5G channels. There's tremendous competition on these rental towers. So find somebody that's a friend or local company, as Bill says, that works. Or let a cell company build on your church property, and then you get first call on the space, and they'll do the environmental. And they can argue to the town board, who has to approve this, the NIMBYs aren't going to object to something that gives you the ability to contact the ambulance with your phone. That's public safety. You can't do that, but the tower company can do that. So
the bottom line is you need to talk to Bob Moore when you do this, because he's going to look at a map of your town and he's going to suggest places. And yes, you can put it on the roof of your church to get started. And then once you get it going, if you can afford it, you could move it to a nearby tower that's higher. That just takes more time. And so if your budget constraint is that you have to do that, then great. I rather just go for the highest, meanest tower I can get, and I just rather jump right to that.
Another thing you can do is, of course, negotiate with the other guys. That's what I was really trying to say here.
Negotiate what?
With the people that are competing with you, you can give them a station and get a station also.
Right.
And the philosophy of my stations, and this is translators as well as full powers, is you take as much as you can get, ultimately. Why should the enemy of the Lord have water to drink? I think Hezekiah said that, didn't he? Well, why should we give them spectrum to drink? We'll take all the spectrum we can get that's legal. And that means height, and also means directional patterns often. Feeding a translator over the air is not impractical, but it involves a creative receive antenna often to get rid of things that you don't want to hear, so you only hear the right thing. And those are a few thoughts. I will be talking later, but Bill's covered all my topics, so I don't know what I'm going to talk about.
Well, your talk's at 3:30, so you got plenty of time. But I do want to address one thing, though. If you say, I'm going to apply small and cheap to get started, and I'll make it bigger later, and you put it on the top of your church, and your competitor applies down the street on a really high tower and covers a bigger area, then he's going to win, and you're going to lose because he's covering a bigger area. So you're weighing out, it's like the whole political thing. You're weighing out all different, competing things to see what makes the most sense. And when there's other people who are aggressively looking for these, if you want to put yourself in a position to win, I would say file fewer applications and better applications than just to use buckshot. With buckshot, maybe you might hit something, but you won't get maybe what you really wanted. Tom?
Yeah, Bill, our LPFM does not have any translators. Our other legal entity has 3. Would we get more points for applying through either those entities because of that?
Well, you're going to get 3 points for localism if the entity is locally established, assuming they use the same point system they've used in the past. So that's going to be the same, 3 points either way. All the other points are related to how much area you cover or population. And so it's really irrelevant. The thing where you could get hurt is on tiebreakers. If you and another group are competing and your applications are equal in every way, one of the tiebreakers is they favor the person with the least number of stations.
Okay.
So and they count full power and translators. So if you have a total of 6 full powers and translators, and the other guy only has 3, everything else is equal, he might win. If you file for a translator for your LPFM, you only have 1 other application, that wouldn't happen. But with your LPFM, you're limited to just a small number of mileage. So really the mileage factor is really what's going to make your decision probably.
And one more question. Let me think what it was. Boy, what was that? Let's see. Full power non-com. Oh, yeah.
Well, I have a question. Have you driven a
There
Ford
you go.
lately?
I was hoping you'd sing that. Yeah. So when the full power non-com window was open, we looked at available possibilities in our area, and there were none. Is there a reason why this one will be different, that we should expect there will be more channels open, or would it be exactly the same? If they weren't available then, they won't be available there
Well, this is
now.
different channels.
Okay.
So these channels are the reserve channels, and none of the prior windows except, let's see, the full power window in 07 affected these channels, but there's not been a translator window for these channels. So it's kind of virgin territory. There could really be a lot of stuff available. Ben? Yeah, Bob has access to all that stuff. Yeah. Hey, Bob can provide you a list of towers in your area. You can also drive up there and look for a tower. And if there's a tower, well, any tower higher than 200 feet has to be registered with the FCC. And it'll have a 7-digit, it's called the Antenna Structure Registration Number, ASRN. It's a 7-digit number beginning with 1. And it has to be posted at the tower site. So if you go there and you see ASR, 1016729, then if you Google FCC ASRN lookup, you can look up and see who the owner is. Somebody else? Where's the microphone? I don't know who has the microphone. Oh, here, up front here.
Actually, it's not a question. It's a comment, information that if you do want to consider going the route of having your own tower, I have the contact information for L&S. That's the company, and they're local to us, Merritt Island, Florida, and they do come out, and they'll go all kinds of places. And they're also, really their heart is they're missionaries really at heart, so they're not going to charge a lot. So, and if you need that info, and they love Jesus, Ron says. And anybody who was at the conference that we did at Merritt Island, you remember that they built a tower in the sanctuary, and right in the middle. Remember that, Ben? And the one guy climbed it in flip-flops. So anyway, just neat brothers.
So why build a tower looking towards the future? And should the Lord tarry, how about building a tower that I could turn around and lease to others who are looking to put stuff on it? If I could get a tall enough tower and I get what I need for the Lord, then I could turn around and sublease or make some money off of an investment as a church investment.
You can do that. And when you find out how much work it is to get the zoning, legal, permits, and whatever else, you may feel like blowing your brains out. So just let me tell you, well, obviously people do it. So I'm not telling you not to do it, but it is a large amount of work. They'll come out and build it for you, but you got to get the permits from the zoning people and everything. Zoning people everywhere are very hostile to towers.
But why not let the cell company do that and you request that you get space on the top?
I'd rather pay $500 a month because you could spend tens of thousands of dollars to build a tower. And yeah, you could maybe rent it out to Verizon and make money on it. Yeah, people do that. You have to just decide, like, what do you want to spend your time? When my mom died, I was thinking of keeping the house and fixing it up, and one of my board members said, do you really need something else to do, Bill? And I thought about it, said, yeah, you're right, yeah, I really don't. So you have to just weigh out how much time you have, and is that a good use of your time? I'm not telling you not to do it, but... Joey! Oh, he is here. He's sitting way in the back. All right.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk. We know...
Did you know Florida is a very long sandbar sticking out into the ocean?
Yeah.
And you're at the very end of it?
Yeah, we're sinking soon, according to the climate scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have a friend, somebody, from our group, that they tried to build a tower in northern Florida, and few tens of $1,000s in, they just had to abandon it. It was just endless bills, and they dumped the project. So yeah, it's a risk, a lot of prayer.
Okay, any more questions? So I want to remind you, the next session begins at 3:30, and we're going to have a choice for the next section.